in conjunction with the U.S. Army units. For them see 69th Infantry Regiment. The 69th Infantry Regiment is an infantry regiment of the United States Army. It is from New York City, part of the New York Army National Guard. It is known as the Fighting 69th, a name said to have been given by Robert E. Lee during the Civil War, an Irish heritage unit. As the citation from poet Joyce Kilmer illustrates, this unit is also nicknamed the Fighting Irish, immortalized in Joyce Kilmer's poem When the 69th Comes Home. Between 1917 and 1992 it was also designated as the 165th Infantry Regiment. It is headquartered at the 69th Regiment Armory in Manhattan. The regiment currently consists of a single light infantry battalion and is part of the 27th Infantry Brigade of the 42nd Infantry Division. Its history dates back to 1849, when it was created as the 9th Regiment New York State Militia and A Company. 169th can trace roots back to the American Revolution. The regiment has seen combat in 5 wars: the American Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. It has also participated in 23 campaigns, so many that the stuffs of its regimental colors are authorized to be 1 foot longer than normal to accommodate them all. Early history and lineage. Late in the 20th century, the U.S. Army changed the lineage and the founding date of the 69th Regiment from 1851 to the 21st of December 1849, with Company A, 1st Battalion, descending from the 8th Company of the 1st New York Regiment of the American Revolutionary War. Unrelated federal units designated as 69th Infantry Regiment during the period when the Fighting 69th was assigned the National Guard 100 Series, Regiment number of 165th Infantry. 2 other federal units were shortly designated the 69th Infantry. Neither of these unrelated federal units ever saw combat. The 1st Federal 69th Infantry Regiment was constituted the 9th of July 1918 in the regular army as the 69th Infantry and assigned to the 10th Infantry Division, organized the 10th of August 1918 at Camp Funston, Kansas from personnel of the 41st Infantry, relieved from the 10th Division and demobilized the 13th of February 1919 at Camp Funston. The 2nd Federal 69th Infantry Regiment was constituted the 1st of October 1933 in the regular army as the 69th Infantry and allotted to the 7th Corps area, organized about 1936 with headquarters at Minneapolis, Minnesota. Disbanded the 11th of November 1944. Irish Revolutionary Movement origins. After the failed Young Islander Rebellion of 1848, Irish revolutionary activity moved to New York City. Irish patriots believed they needed an Irish brigade to free Ireland from Britain. In late 1848, they organized independent military companies in the city. Drills were held at the Centre Market, and by mid-1849 a skeleton of the 1st Irish Regiment had been formed. It is to this regiment that the 69th traces its lineage. Michael Doheny, a refugee from the failed 1848 revolt, was a company commander in this regiment. He was instrumental in the founding of all the early Irish regiments. In 1849, Irish revolutionary leaders in New York City convinced the state to form an Irish regiment from the independent companies. On the 21st of December 1849, the 1st Irish Regiment was adopted by the state. Michael Doheny, Richard O'Gorman, and James Houston, and Michael Phelan, who had not all believed in training soldiers within the New York State Militia to free Ireland. As a result, the original 9th Regiment, formed in 1799, was disbanded the 27th of May 1850 and its companies transferred to the 8th Regiment. 2 days later, on the 29th of May 1850, the 1st Irish Regiment was mustered into the New York State Militia as the 9th Regiment with Colonel Benjamin Clinton Ferris, commander. The 2nd Irish Regiment was organized on the 12th of October 1851 and mustered into the New York State Militia on the 1st of November 1851 as the 69th Regiment. Michael Doheny left the 9th and was appointed Lieutenant Colonel of the 69th. In May 1852, the 72d Regiment was established on Long Island. Thomas Francis Mather, another leader of the failed rebellion of 1848, escaped to New York in 1852. Doheny then began to organize another Irish regiment with Mather as the commander. Doheny left the 69th to become the Lt. Colonel of this new 75th Regiment, formed from new and existing companies as the Republican Rifles. Since Mather was rarely in New York, Doheny was the actual commander. The Irish Brigade was now substantially in place by the summer of 1853. Leaders moved between the three regiments throughout the 1850s. Captain James Houston left the 9th to join the 69th, as did Michael Doheny. Mather was elected lieutenant colonel by the 69th in 1855 but declined the position as he was not a citizen. The three Irish regiments coexisted until late 1858, when all three were rolled into the 69th. Thus the rest of the Irish Brigade went out of existence until the Civil War. The 9th Regiment ceased to exist until 1859, when it was once again organized. Tensions in New York City. The new Irish Catholic regiments caused uneasiness among American nativists of the Know-Nothing Party, whose membership was limited to Protestant males of British American lineage. In 1852, the nativists formed a new militia regiment designated the 71st Regiment, the American Guard, commanded by Colonel Vosburgh until he died in 1861. Although the 69th and the 71st represented opposite views and had no contact during the 1850s, they became close in 1861 when both were stationed in Washington prior to the First Battle of Bull Run. Within the 9th Regiment, Captain James Houston commanded a secret organization of Irish revolutionaries known as the SF. The SF was called the Sinn Féins by J. C.P. Stokes, the historian of the 9th Regiment, in his 4 November 1953 letter to B.G. Keys concerning the history of the Irish 9th. The 1854 Crimean War was an opportunity for Irish revolutionaries, but disputes between James Houston and Michael Doheny crippled any action. Houston left the 69th, but conflicts continued. Although radical Irish societies were formed, all attempts to strike a blow for Ireland failed. Conflicts between Archbishop Hughes and the Irish revolutionary leaders further exacerbated the situation. In 1855, racial, religious, and political tension was high in New York City. In January, the prominent Native American gang leader, Bill the Butcher Poole, was killed. 2 Irishmen were arrested for the crime. The Know-Nothings tried to stir up anti-Catholic sentiments. There were several riots, and both the 69th and the 9th were called to restore order. It was decided that military units would not march in the St. Patrick's Day parade because of the tensions. On St. Patrick's Day 1855, the 9th, 69th, 7th and 12th Regiments were held at the parade ground to await orders rather than march in the parade. As soon as the 69th was released, they marched with fixed bayonets down Broadway through the park before they were dismissed. The other military units did not march. Other states eliminated ethnic-oriented militias in the 1850s because of similar tensions. By 1858, the only Irish regiment remaining would be the 69th. A new Irish secret society called the Fenians arose. Although not powerful within the 9th, they were extremely so within the 69th. After the consolidation with the 9th in 1858, the 69th adopted the 9th name of National Cadets. The Fenians were founded as the Irish Revolutionary Brotherhood in 1858 by James Stephens, a leader of the 1848 revolt. Michael Corcoran was second in command. At the outbreak of the Civil War, Corcoran commanded the 69th Regiment and was also the head of the Fenians. As the leader, he advised the Fenian membership not to join the militia. The Prince of Wales Parade. In 1860, Michael Corcoran was named Colonel of the 69th. He gained fame and notoriety when he refused to parade the regiment for the visiting Prince of Wales protesting the British imposition of the Irish famine. He was placed under arrest, but the charges were dropped when the bombardment of Fort Sumter began the Civil War. During the Civil War, Irish Republican leaders supported the Irish militia. Michael Phelan and Richard O'Gorman raised funds for families of 69th soldiers wounded at Bull Run in 1861. Houston was killed at Gettysburg in 1863. Mather returned from Bull Run to form the new Irish Brigade. Corcoran, captured at Bull Run, returned to New York and formed another Irish brigade called Corcoran's Legion. Doheny died in 1862. In the early 1850s, he had stopped believing that Irish units should be organized within the militia system since it created a conflict of allegiances. The Civil War. The 69th Infantry Regiment traces its Civil War honors through three units: the 1st Regiment of the Irish Brigade, the 182nd New York Volunteer Infantry and the 69th National Guard Infantry. The Irish Brigade was noted for its ability to tackle tough missions. As one war correspondent said during the Civil War, when anything absurd, forlorn, or desperate was to be attempted, the Irish Brigade was called upon. Bull Run. The 69th New York Militia was called up and sent to Washington in April 1861. After engaging in the assault in the First Battle of Bull Run, the regiment, along with the Fire Zouaves, formed the rear guard of the Union Army and protected it as it made its retreat towards Washington. The commander, Colonel Michael Corcoran, was taken prisoner during two charges at a Confederate artillery battery. Besides the colonel and second-in-command, the 69th sustained losses of 41 officers and men killed, 85 wounded and 60 prisoners. Thomas Francis Mather, captain of the regiment's Zouave Company, was promoted to colonel. The immense painting commemorating this return of the 69th Regiment by Louis Lang is on display at the New York Historical Society. The 7 days after 90 days service, the 69th New York State Militia was mustered out and re-enrolled as the 69th New York State Volunteers. Mather proposed the creation of an Irish Brigade in which the 69th would form the 1st Regiment. Mather was promoted to Brigadier General and given command of the new brigade. The Irish Brigade, then 3,000 strong, saw heavy action during the 7 days battles. Malvern Hill and Antietam. In Malvern Hill, the 69th led the brigade in a charge against advancing Southern troops. The 69th forced the retreat of the famed Confederate Irish Regiment Louisiana Tigers, an event for which General Robert E. Lee gave the regiment its nickname, the Fighting 69th. Later, in both World War I and in Operation Iraqi Freedom, the 69th and the Louisiana Tigers fought side by side against a common enemy. At Antietam, General Maffer personally led the 69th as the Irish Brigade charged the sunken road. The 69th, already badly mauled, suffered 60% casualties. Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. The regiment was virtually destroyed in its uphill attack on the well-prepared Confederate positions on Marye's Heights during the Battle of Fredericksburg, suffering more casualties than they had at Antietam. Afterwards, the audacity of the attack was saluted with a rousing cheer by the Confederate defenders. The day after the battle, the 69th was issued its famed second colors, one set of which were later given to the Oirectors by John F. Kennedy on the centennial of the battle. After Chancellorsville, only 300 men remained in the regiment. General Maffer resigned as commander of the Irish Brigade, stating that the brigade ceased to exist. The 69th's commander, Patrick Kelly, was named as the new commander of the brigade. At Gettysburg, the regiment, vastly outnumbered, held the wheat field until it was overwhelmed. Petersburg and Appomattox. Following Gettysburg, the Irish Brigade ceased to exist as a functioning unit and was disbanded in June 1864. The depleted ranks of the 69th Regiment were filled with new volunteers and draftees from New York's Irish ghettos. At the end of the summer of 1864, the 69th rejoined its Irish comrades as 1st Regiment of the 2nd Irish Brigade. The brigade served until the end of the war and was present at the surrender of General Lee at Appomattox. Out of more than 2,000 regiments that served with the Union Army, the 69th lost more men than all but 6 regiments. Return and Reconstitution. The regiment marched in the Washington, D.C. Victory Parade and returned to New York. All the regiments of the Irish Brigade were disbanded except the 69th, which remained part of the New York National Guard. The 69th remained a place of unity and culture for Irish Americans in the post-war years. It was called into active service in 1898 for the Spanish-American War, transported to Chickamauga, Georgia, Tampa, Florida and Huntsville, Alabama, but it did not see combat due to the brevity of that war. In 1916, the regiment was posted to McAllen, Texas along the Mexican border during the Punitive Expedition. World War I. The entry of the United States into World War I saw a resurrection of the old spirit of the 69th. Doubled in size by new War Department regulations, its ranks were filled with Irish Americans and New Yorkers detailed from other regiments, and it was sent over to the Western Front in October 1917 as part of the 42nd Rainbow Division of the American Expeditionary Force, commanded by General John J. Pershing. All National Guard regiments received new 100 series regimental numbers at the time. The 69th was renumbered the 165th Infantry Regiment, but still retained its Irish symbolism and spirit, and every member since then has been designated an honorary Irishman. His father Duffy described non-Irish who join the regiment. They are Irish by adoption, Irish by association, or Irish by conviction. Rouge Bouquet arriving in France in November 1917. The regiment first engaged in training near Valcolas and Gran. It then undertook a legendary muddy 80-mile march just after Christmas through the Vosges Mountains to Longueuil and Luneville. It had its first combat experience on February 26, 1918 in the nearby trenches of the Rouge Bouquet Chaussee sector in the Forêt de Parouille near the village of Baccarat. While there, it suffered its first combat casualties, including the deaths of 21 men from the 2nd Battalion on March 7 when a dugout collapsed under bombardment. This event was memorialized in Sergeant Joyce Kilmer's poem, Rouge Bouquet, Champagne, after participating in numerous raids into German territory and suffering significant casualties from mustard gas attacks. The regiment was placed in reserve in the Baccarat sector. On June 18, it moved to the Champagne sector near Saint-Hilaire. There, it and the rest of the Rainbow Division stopped the German advance in the Second Battle of the Marne that began on July 14. Château d'Yeri on July 24. The 42nd Division moved to Château d'Yeri to relieve the embattled U.S. 26th Division. The fighting 69th led with distinction the crossing of the Ourcq River July 28–31, but suffering 264 killed, 150 mere, and 1,200 WIA out of the 3,000-man regiment in 4 days fighting, having broken the German lines, who were now reluctantly retreating. The 83rd Brigade commander, Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur, was looking to press forward, when informed that the other regiments had replied that they were too fatigued, but that the decimated 69th replied that it would still consider an order to advance as a compliment. He exclaimed, "By God, it takes the Irish when you want a hard thing done." St. Mihiel. After Château Thierry, the regiment refitted. Replacements from all over the United States arrived, becoming about 65% of the regiment's enlisted men and nearly 75% of the officers. Meanwhile, General Pershing, commander of the AEF on the Western Front, had finally amassed enough troops to form an autonomous American field army. Its first battle would be to pinch off the St. Mihiel salient. The Rainbow Division with the fighting 69th would participate from the right side, pressing northwest from Beaumont, assisted by Lieutenant Colonel George Patton's 1st Tank Brigade. Many days of marches through the rain brought the 69th to the jump-off point by September 10, but the rain delayed the start to September 12. The Germans sensed the build-up and were in the process of withdrawing, so resistance was light. The regiment captured thousands of Germans in open field fighting while suffering 47 killed and reached its objective of Saint-Benoît on the 15th of September. Meuse-Argonne. Its final exploits came when the 42nd Division relieved the 1st Infantry Division during the third phase of the Meuse-Argonne offense, attacking against a well-entrenched enemy in terrible terrain without support from units on its flanks. The regiment suffered heavy casualties while moving forward and captured Hill 252 overlooking the Meuse River on November 7. Once again, it was the tip of the spear of the American First Army. The war ended 4 days later with the signing of the armistice, but the 69th then served as occupation troops in Remagen before returning to New York in the spring of 1919. Return and amp recognition. Upon the return from France, Colonel Donovan remarked that the morale of the regiment has never been better than it is today. Formerly 85% of its strength were of Irish descent, and now it is only 50%. But the spirit of the old fighting 69th is stronger than ever. The replacements, whether they are Jews, Italians, or other foreign descent, are more Irish now than the Irish." He also later pointed out that at one point during the Argonne battle, the adjutants of all 3 battalions were Jews. One lieutenant was born in Germany, and another lieutenant was a full-blooded Choctaw from Oklahoma. During World War I, total casualties of the regiment amounted to 644 killed in action and 2,587 wounded during 164 days of front-line combat. One member of the regiment killed in World War I was Daniel Buckley, who survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic in 1912. 60 members earned the Distinguished Service Cross and 3 of its members were awarded the Medal of Honor, including its famed 1st Battalion and later regimental commander, William Joseph Donovan. Colonel Donovan went on to organize the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, retiring as a Major General. It also produced Father Francis Duffy, the fighting chaplain. In France, Duffy was always seen in the thick of battle, assisting the litter-bearers in recovering the wounded, administering last rites, burying the dead, and encouraging the men, while unarmed, and at great risk to his own life. His bravery and inspired leadership was so great that at one point the brigade commander, Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur, even considered making him the regimental commander, an unheard-of role for a chaplain. With the New York National Guard federalized during the war, a new state force, the New York Guard, was organized in 1917 in order to have militia troops available if needed by the governor of New York under the New York State Constitution. As part of this, a replacement 69th Infantry Regiment was created. On January 7, 1921, the 165th Infantry Regiment was consolidated with the 69th Infantry of the New York Guard and reorganized as the 69th Infantry Regiment, New York National Guard.